Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for being here. And we are so delighted to have the architects with us here today. For 25 years, the Commission has offered a space where architecture, art, and also daily life can converge, free and open to all in the heart of the park, building new connections between artists and audiences all summer. And there are never doors. Visitors are invited to walk in. It is architecture for everyone. On behalf of our chairman, Michael Bloomberg, and our trustees, I want to begin by thanking Isabel and Alessandro. It has been a real joy to work together for the last 12 months and to help bring this vision of yours to life. We are incredibly grateful to you and to so many more people who have made this pavilion possible. It's very much these long durational relationships which make a huge difference and help us to produce this reality. I want to start by welcoming Her Excellency Sheikha Al Mayassa, who is here with us today, chairperson of the Qatar Museum Authority. We are incredibly excited and also grateful to her and Qatar Museums for this partnership, which is instrumental now for the third year in a row. We collaborated on the previous pavilion, a capsule in time by Marina Tabassum, and also the archipelagic void by Min-Suk Cho. Qatar Museum have also been crucial in other areas of our program. The Giuseppe Pennone show is a collaboration. Very excited at this exhibition which happened here. And you can still see the tree after the talk. Maybe we can all revisit the tree of Giuseppe. We're excited that this exhibition will actually later this year have a second iteration, a completely new version. We will go from a basically vegetal exhibition to a mineral exhibition of Pennone, and it will happen in Qatar. And of course, it began all many years ago when we collaborated in 2013 and 14 on Fischli Weiss, rock on top of another rock. And then the year after, the Etel Adnan project, the visionary Etel Adnan in all her dimensions. I also want to thank our headline sponsor, Goldman Sachs, for 12 consecutive years of support. It's this long-term belief that the Commission enables architects from around the world to fulfill what Zaha Hadid always told us, that there should be no end to experimentation. This is something we really remember every morning when we come to the Serpentine, that this should remain our motto. And it's thanks to this long support of Goldman Sachs that we could actually start to work with younger generations of architects and enable them the possibility to build here. Architecture binds us to the past, the present, and the future. And time is, of course, important to Rolex, who joined the Serpentine Pavilion as official timepiece and have championed architecture through its perpetual arts initiative for nearly 2 decades now. It's no coincidence that so many architects in the pavilion's history here at Serpentine, Alvaro Siza, Kazuo Sejima, Peter Zumthor, Lina Gottme, are all part of the Rolex family too. So we're very excited this year to begin this new partnership and are thrilled that, again, it connects to collaborations in the past. We remember in 2007, we collaborated with Rolex on the Experiment Marathon with the late John Baldessari, whom I want to remember here, and also on the Rolex Mentorship Initiative in 2011. Thank you also to the Graham Foundation and the Kenneth C. Griffin and Griffin Catalyst, who are lead supporter of our Art in the Park program. Thanks go to our technical partners, ECOM and Stage 1 Creative Services, who are led by John Leach and Tim Lee, on their 17th pavilion with us. So that, again, is very long duration. You can see that that notion of long duration is important. You know, the philosopher Roman Kaczarnik always said we live in a world of short-termism and we need to find more long-durational partnerships. We are grateful to Weil, to Gallo Glass, to Zumtobel, to Thorn, to DP9, the technical department, and also Wiener Berger. Our thanks go always to Bloomberg Philanthropies. If you want to know more about this pavilion, about Lanza Atelier, about our summer program, we encourage you to download the amazing app, Bloomberg Connects, where you find a lot of background information. We are grateful to the Royal Parks, to our trustees, to council members, to the supporters who are here today, and of course to the entire Serpentine Dream Team for their extraordinary work on this pavilion. Special gratitude goes to Julie Burnell, who has realized here with us her 18th pavilion, to Catherine Blanchard, to Tamsin Hong, to Liz Stumpf and the wider teams. We also want to thank the selection committee, the jury, the annual jury, which besides Serpentine CEO Bettina Korek and myself, included Julie Bernal, Director of Construction and Special Project, Exhibition Curator Chris Bailey, Exhibition Curator Tamsin Hong, and also the architect advisor to our Serpentine Pavilion, the architect Sue Fujimoto. Serpentine will publish Lanza's first monograph to accompany the pavilion. It will be designed by Lanza's friends, Estudio Herrera, and will feature newly commissioned texts by Pulitzer Prize-winning author Cristina Rivera Garza, who was also a candidate for the Nobel Prize of Literature last year, and also by the executive director and chief curator at Storefront for Art and Architecture in New York, Jose Esparca Chong Kui, who is with us here today and whom we also want to welcome and thank for so many years of dialogue. Isabel, Abascal, of course, will also write for the catalog alongside a poem by Ocean Wong. And you can pre-order a copy of the catalog using the QR code on the printed guide. The book will come out very soon. Lanza Atelier have also designed a limited edition stool inspired by the distinctive curves of the Coco de Mar seed, bringing together natural materiality and also artisanal fabrication. This work reflects on the wider themes of this pavilion, the exploration of form, of process, and also nature-led design. And that's, of course, also the motivation behind this amazing furniture you see here. And when there is not a talk during the day, visitors are invited to move these chairs around, create their own cluster, create their own kind of conversation situations. And I'm now very thrilled to begin the discussion with Isabel Abascal and Alessandro Arienzo. And please give them a very warm welcome. Isabel and Alessandro, I thought it would be great, and I see here the script is about to fly away with the wind. It's something which happens often in our talks in the pavilion. I wanted to begin with the beginning and ask you kind of how it all began. How did you come to architecture, or how did architecture come to you?
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you, Hans Ulrich, for putting this beautiful gathering together. I feel like I came to architecture twice, or architecture came to me twice. First time when I was 17 and I started architecture school. At the time I was interested in so many different things, from history to mathematics to poetry to physics, and architecture revealed itself as the discipline that had everything in it. And then at a second time, when 17 years later, when I became pregnant with my first child, and after having inhabited spaces for so many long, I became inhabited by another being. So my very intellectual relationship to architecture somehow left room for a more biological, or I don't know, like corporal relationship to architecture.
Hello, everyone. When we together start making trips together, like road trips, we always put attention to a lot of things that happen on the road, on the different towns we visited. And always that something was pretty important to us is how things activated, or how people react to certain spaces or solutions for fixing their environment. And I think that idea of being part of that decisions, or being part of that world, made Lanza begin.
Now, Lanza was founded exactly 10 years ago. So maybe it would be great that you tell us a little bit the story about how it began. And there is also a funny story how you found the name.
Well, the name, maybe we will talk about later about the story, but we do like the name because it's also a noun and a verb. That means that it's an action, and also like a responsibility of putting like an object to the world. And it's part of the thing we were talking about, like about what happens when you put certain things in the world, that the activity that activates. And I think that's part of the motto of the office is we don't care so much about how the building is going to look or how it's going to get built, because we kind of have a reactive way of approaching that sense. We are interested in how people can relate and how people can communicate with the structure itself.
And then, of course, the question of the brick, because it kind of all started with the material. I remember in the very first meetings, and now that we celebrate the beginning of this pavilion, it's kind of interesting. Of course, the Serpentine, see here Serpentine South is made out of brick. Big parts of London are made out of brick. So it's kind of astonishing that in the 26 years of the Serpentine Pavilion, this is the 25th pavilion because there was 1 year without the pavilion during COVID, but the scheme started in 2000 with Zaha Hadid. And in all these 26 years, there has never been a pavilion made out of brick. We were actually talking the other day with Julia Peyton-Johns and discussing that the floor of the Alvaro Siza Soto de Mura pavilion had elements of brick, but it wasn't the structure. So it's astonishing that it's the first structure made out of brick. So I wanted to ask you a little bit to tell us about why to choose brick as a core material, your relationship to that theme. And it's kind of interesting because Louis Kahn famously asked, what does a brick want to be?
Well, in this case, the brick wanted to be here. It didn't want to have any shape. As we were saying, we don't have a special investigation about certain materials or certain specific ways of making buildings. We kind of like to understand where the building is going to be. In this case, was the first time we were going to make a building without being on the site, and we start defining the whole shape of the building by the canopy offset we needed to have. And at some point, the brick came probably because we wanted to land this serpentine wall in the middle of the lawn. So that brought us also the idea to maybe use brick, and then we have the serpentine pretty obvious to relate to. And then the city was made of brick, and then that said, okay, let's do a temporary structure with brick. And probably that was the main challenge because, of course, we all have this pre-established way of understanding like a brick wall. And yeah.
We also love how brick is made of earth, of clay. It's one of the first materials humanity employed. There are brick buildings that have been standing for millennia. And we think it's a material everybody can relate to. And of course, because we are inspired by the crinkle walls, we needed to reenact one of these walls using the same material in a very different way because we are not using any mortar, so the pavilion can be disassembled after several months and have a second life.
And you mentioned already, in a way, anticipated the next question, which is about this idea of the crinkle wall. It's a wall which is not straight, it's a serpentine, and this very kind of organic line was from the beginning the idea of this pavilion. Now it's interesting, you explained to us quite early in the process that you're interested in the idea that actually this wall uses less bricks than if it was a straight wall.
We think that revelation is very joyful. The fact that an undulating wall uses as much as 50% less bricks than a straight wall, just by the smartness of its geometry, because it creates waves that makes it very stable. And that allows it to, instead of having two lines of bricks or columns or buttresses, have only one line of bricks, which reduces the amount of material. But we believe that while using less material, it provides much more because it creates like this series of rooms people can use, people can hide in. It's very playful. So we think it's something very technical. There's, a structural reason for it to be. There's an economic reason for it to be because these walls became popular at the end of the 18th century where there was a strong tax on bricks, so people needed to use less. But at the same time, again, it's like something that reveals itself as very playful for everybody.
Now, also during the research for the pavilion, you went on a kind of a pilgrimage, and this pilgrimage led you to Suffolk to see kind of historic crinkle walls. And you sent us all these photographs. And I was actually thinking it can be kind of great for everyone that you tell us a little bit where to find these historic walls, because it might be interesting for all of us to actually, during the summer at some point, go and visit them.
Well, we went to Suffolk, that it's north in the country, and it was interesting that when we find the first crinkle wall, like we saw them not as architects, but we kind of have this kind of discovery that we were still kids and discovering the wall. Like we discovered that the wall had like echoes. If you put it, like if you speak to like to someone, or like people start hiding in the wall itself. All the patina has like and the historical patina that actually gained with time, and I think was a very important thing to do, because the energy that those walls have over there is kind of the energy we want to have here with the kids and the programs with the museum. And I mean, sometimes you see a wall and it's a very kind of simple and non-expressive thing, but like once you actually leave a crinkle crankle wall, it's very different.
And there are hundreds of these walls listed under the Historic England list, so you can just go online and look for them. There are many of them in Suffolk, but also in other home counties.
And also, the idea of connection actually came to my mind, because obviously one of the things which is, I think, relevant with the Serpentine Pavilion is that in the middle of London, with free admission, with no doors, there is this possibility for people to connect. And when Francis Quéré designed the pavilion, he talked about a tree of connection. He remembered his childhood in Burkina Faso and people, gathering under a tree, and he wanted the pavilion in a way to render that. Lina Gottme answered to that by the idea of à table, when she basically created a big table in the pavilion here where strangers could gather, people could gather and have meetings and meet new people. Of course, last year with Marina Tabassum, it was a very, very long bench around the whole pavilion where, again, lots of people met there for the first time. So in a way, in an age or in a time when there's so much division and separation, I think it's important with public art institutions to have these places where people can connect. And it was interesting that you said from the beginning you wanted that as well, but you wanted to create it through a wall. And I mean, usually we associate the wall as something which separates, but your wall kind of binds. It's also interesting that the wall actually allows us to look outside. It's again makes me think of Louis Kahn. If you think about the Roosevelt thing he did in New York, where we can see, through the stones. So maybe we can talk a little bit more about this idea. We go from Quéré's tree of connection to Gottme's table of connection to your wall of connection.
Yes, we like to subvert things and subvert how the common accepted meanings of things. So in this case, that's why for us it's very joyful that from afar these walls might look massive and opaque, but when you get near, as one approaches the walls, they again reveal themselves as being more permeable, very light. We managed to have only 10 centimeters wide walls, and again, in the present moment, we think architecture can speak in a very subtle way, just through construction. So the message we're putting through is let's subvert the idea of division and of separation by creating a device that, even if historically has been meant to do that, today can attract people and provoke a moment of encounter.
Yeah, and I think when the technical part of architecture echoes to the atmosphere and to the architecture, like in this case, to make a temporary structure, we needed to build a wall with columns. So that means that we will gaining this gap, and like we will, and then understanding that we could use that to provide this type of feeling of looking out or having the breeze, or like yesterday was very windy, to block it, or like have different moments with them.
When we had Minzuk Tru's Pavilion here 2 years ago, we had the visit of Kenneth Frampton, who is his teacher. And of course, in Kenneth's work, there is a kind of a focus on crinkle crankle as an agricultural technology, a way of trapping heat to cultivate fruit and English cold. And in studies in tectonic culture, Frampton argues that the most interesting architecture is always the result of a specific technical problem. And that specific technical problem can generate an unexpected sort of spatial or also aesthetic consequence. So I wanted to ask you about that, because I think it's another aspect we should mention in relation to the crinkle crankle wall, that it actually comes out of agriculture. But then also it leads us to the question how somehow in architecture, or in your architecture, engineering logic and poetic logic are maybe somehow inseparable, or connected at least.
We think architecture nowadays should be more responsive, like should be more flexible, in the sense like it has to do with the ideas we were talking about, like how to react to certain activities instead of thinking or focusing on the building itself. So, yeah, I think in this case, I think you should continue.
No, for us it was just after discover when we realized these walls were always oriented, not always, but maybe 80-70% of the cases in the east-west axis, because the southern exposure could help create microclimates, and people, like experientially were learning this and taking advantage of that microclimate or that amount of heat to grow vegetables and fruits that belong to southern latitudes. So for us, many different things we're interested in converge together, like, for example, biodiversity. Well, when we were in Suffolk, we saw all these wildflowers growing around the wall, so that's maybe the only landscape element we've brought in. But again, as a result of a technical need, which was the need for stability using less material, this sensual and very creative shape emerged. And that's what we are interested in, like the smartness of architecture to replicate a typology that works and that it's also, offers so much spatiality.
And then there are the columns. That wasn't there at the beginning. It's interesting, the columns, we can touch them here. The columns came a little bit later, and you felt that maybe the space initially was a bit empty. But the columns, of course, also mirror, in a way, the trees. And you kind of, Lina Bobardi always said that the insides are on the outside. And in many of, I once curated an exhibition in Lina Bobardi's house in Sao Paulo, so I spent months, in this house. And that's when I really understood what she meant. The insides there are literally outside and vice versa. You kind of live with the trees. And I think that's something which also is relevant in your work. In your house where you live, there is also a very close connection to nature, and you made it also here and kind of bring the trees inside and outside. Yeah, let's talk about the columns, the connection to the trees, to nature.
If you see the plan floor of the pavilion and you take out like the north wall, you will understand that you have a bunch of dots in the plan, and it was a nice continuation to have these columns being part of the trees, but at the same time being part of them.
Yeah, the pattern of the columns is very interesting because if you see, we have like the curves of the waves, but then we have little straight lines connecting those curves, and the 45 degrees pattern of the columns follows the wall. So somehow the columns are responding to the wall itself, and we're extremely delighted that we managed to have one brick wide columns. They are so slim. They like a contractor came in the other day and just asked, "Are these bricks just stacked on top of each other?" And like the lead contractor team said, yes, actually they are. So for us, it's very beautiful to provoke some feeling, even in people that are used to deal with buildings all the time. And at the same time, for us, I think the reference to Lina Bobardi is very precious. We are like great admirers of her work. In her house, it's called the glass house, right? So everything in the main living room is out of glass. So here again, how to create a connection with nature when you have brick walls instead of glass walls. Of course, we have a very light roof, and that allows us to, to have glimpses of the green behind, of the lawn, of the trees. But at the same time, and in a more subtle way, because the north wall and also the south bench are responding to the possessions of the pre-existing trees. They are shaped by those trees, but they are also recording those trees. So when in the second lives of the pavilion, it's like these trees are gonna travel with the pavilion to wherever it goes.
So the insides are on the outside, and that leads us also to the fact that you actually wanted to bring the pavilion into the park. And after this talk, you're all invited to have a drink near the bench. So we're going to go outside. So maybe it's also interesting that you tell us a little bit, because we can see it here through the gaps. There is a bench.
The bench was an important element because it's so humble, right? It feels like another scale, but for us it's another scale of architecture because we do a lot of furniture design, and for us it's the same line of thinking. There's no difference between designing furniture or large urban projects. So maybe that's why for us it was obvious that if we wanted to inhabit the whole lawn, if we wanted to go from edge to edge and really inhabit the boundaries of the site, even if we could tuck into the trees in the north to somehow make room for the lawn to be part of the pavilion, by creating that southern edge, we were saying, okay, the pavilion doesn't end here, it doesn't end at the wall, but it extends till the bench, and on the bench you can sit and you can observe the pavilion from. So it's like half of the pavilion it's covered, but the other half of the pavilion it's open air.
Yeah, and you can see it as a bench, and you can see it as a space to play, and you can see it a space to hide. And it's also like a way of understanding the facade that brings the garden together. No?
Yeah, it's always unexpected how people are going to use it. We always, the earliest visitors in the morning are always the joggers, and I'm sure that's going to be activity.
I bet my kids went to the bench right now.
Amazing. Now, we spoke about, your inspiration from the pilgrimage you made to Suffolk, from the, the research you did here in the UK on brick architecture. But of course, the kind of inspiration comes also from the streets of Mexico City, where you are based, where you have your studio, where you live. You've done lots of projects there in public space. You've collaborated, you've worked on pavilions, 2 pavilions in Mexico City. And you told me many times that the daily rituals, in a way, in the city are a big inspiration. So maybe we can hear a little bit more about that, because of course we're here in a temporary structure, and of course these are spaces of encounter and gathering. So I think it would be interesting to hear your history with such spaces of encounter, your previous pavilions, and what you kind of learned from these improvised structures you come across in Mexico City.
Improvised. It's an interesting word, because all those like the inspiration, if we want to call it that way, that we see in the street, those improvisations are so creative that that makes you understand how to approach to certain projects, and more like the temporary ones. That they will be, for example, the Logroño intervention that we put 3 20 diameter, 30 and 40 circles in Rafael Moneo's building. So that in that festival, it's going to last 5 days. That it's extremely low for an architecture intervention. We kind of approach the project thinking, okay, if the project is going to have 5 days, we don't need to spend more than 5 days thinking about this, and they will have to build it in 2 days, no? And we will have 0 waste. So you cannot make those tests and those risks by experimenting, if you want to call it like that. It's just like, okay, let's go for it. And then, for example, we understand if you put these 3 huge benches, that it's part of like maybe this last one, you understand like the consequences of it. In that case was we were kind of erasing that space and making all the plaza way smaller, and then bringing people together, like paths to approach the building. And that was something that we didn't expect really to happen. No? And maybe you can talk about the Lincoln or not.
And for the pavilions in Mexico City, for example, just to highlight that we don't always use brick. It's more like we're very contextual, and whatever material it's local and fits the purpose of the project, we go for it and try to highlight it as the main material to really expand on the possibilities of that specific material. But the other project, Alessandro was talking about this pavilion in the Lincoln Park. It was done in 2017 after the earthquake, the big earthquake in Mexico City and Puebla and Oaxaca, and there was this need for reconstruction in many smaller towns. So we used the budget of the festival to buy like earth press blocks, and then we stack them to create this pavilion for 2-3 weeks, and then those same blocks were sent to Aquila, to a town that needed them for reconstruction purposes. So we really are always attentive of the idea of circular economy. And in the case of that pavilion, it was like this subtle balance between water and land, which is how Mexico City was somehow created, because it was built on a series of lakes. And there was like this walk that was at the same level with the pond that exists in the park. Or a more recent pavilion last year that was done for the 10th anniversary of the Palacio de Hierro. It was meant to be built on top of a 12 meters wide fountain. So we wanted the pavilion itself to function as a fountain, but to do that, we wanted to pump the water up and then let it go down the facade of the pavilion. So it ended up being an 18 meters wide structure out of steel chain, and the water could just like slowly go down the chain and create a lot of reflections and like cross views. So we always try to integrate a natural element. It might be water. In this case, it might be paying attention to nature, but always have somehow an equilibrium between the built world and the natural world.
So pavilion are a kind of a possibility, for you to experiment. But another kind of important field of experimentation is exhibition design. You've done numerous display features for exhibitions. The most recent ones is basically the pavilion, Jose curated of Pavilion Midalzami, the Kosovo Pavilion, which is at the Venice Biennale at the moment. But you've also done museum exhibitions at UMEX and others. Can you talk maybe about the kind of exhibition design or the idea of a display feature in an exhibition as a locus of experimentation?
We always say that architecture exists in every scale, and furniture, exhibition design links very well like spatial thinking with craftsmanship and like furniture scale. So, and having for art as a medium and curators as a client and working inside a museum actually has made us be a little bit more risky or test certain ideas that won't be necessarily forever, and that has been a very nice tool for understanding more the permanent world of the architecture.
Yeah, in the case, we're especially pleased with the recently inaugurated Kosovo National Pavilion in Venice. We were very privileged, I think, to work with Rilan Milatsimi, a young Kosovar artist, and with Jose Esparza-Chonqui, the curator, with who we have collaborated since more than a decade now. And in this case, there's always this, complex relationship between biennals and cities. So we were really happy that the venue that was finally inhabited by the pavilion, it's a church called Santa Maria del Pianto, that had been closed to the public since the 70s. So for more than half a century, it had been closed to the city. And now after the Biennale, it will remain open. So we always pay attention with exhibition design at the museums or venues in which we work. And honestly, we sometimes take advantage of the exhibition to activate the architecture or to change certain things in the architecture. In the case of the Kosovo Pavilion, there is this 18 meters long mural painting, and then several other paintings, like more hidden in the niches and rooms of the church. So we just designed a set of wooden easels, a set of wooden benches, and then a set of wooden panels that would allow us to not touch the church, but to let the paintings again live in the church.
But for example, it sounds very easy, not just to make those easels, like to hold paintings, but the paintings were about like these people having waiting lines, and it was a bit, you can feel the expression of these people. So the easels should also perform some sort of character, some sort of like personality in some way. So this just to find out little details that make these structures talk a little bit or have a presence. It's something that we always try to engage with.
Yeah, like the easels had little feet, so it felt like people were carrying the paintings.
In a way, these different scales, because the scale of an exhibition, there is the scale of your furniture, then the scale of a public building, because you also design public buildings. It all kind of comes together here in the pavilion. And of course, we have your furniture here, and there is much more of it during the day. And as I mentioned in the introduction, visitors are kind of invited to move the furniture around. That's something we had in 2006 also with Rem Koolhaas's and Cecil Balmond's pavilion. They encourage visitors to permanently make different constellations of sitting arrangement because it provokes different meetings, right? People can have bigger gatherings, people can make circles and meet in circles. So maybe it would be nice that you tell us a little bit about your furniture and also that idea that in a way there isn't a prescribed way of, I mean, that's now as prescribed as it can get because we need to add chairs for a public talk, no? But during the day when you experience the pavilion on any other day when there isn't a talk, there are so many different ways how one can use this pavilion and move in this pavilion and sit in the pavilion.
For this pavilion, we rescue a chair we designed for a dining set and made some small differences. I didn't help because I cannot carry anything. I'm taking advantage of that. No kids, no chairs. But in this case, we took the simple chair was part of a dining set, and it's a pretty simple chair. I think Henry is here, remembers very well when we did it. All made hand-drawn, like directly to the carpenter. And it was so nicely and was so expressive. And also because of the trapezoidal form, you could build circles if you have a bunch of them, or you can also build like a serpent shape. But we also wanted, well, we thought that we needed like a stool also for putting your coffee or your phone or your bag. So we just cut the back seat and put it like in the sitting space so you can just grab it and move it around. So all those tiny things, for us, it's very, I mean, you have to have fun with the things you design. And also, we like to create relationships. So if you put it on the opposite side, the circles will relate. But we believe when you actually make click with these ideas, you wake up a little bit, you could like have fun with it, you get smarter maybe. And it allows people to engage with the design world that probably sometimes is a bit difficult to do. Even with the walls here, because people always asking or putting their fingers on it, because you can see these marks and people like kind of want to be part of it. And it's funny just to see how people can touch and relate to things.
So the pavilion changes, with the movement of the furniture and the visitors and the different constellations. It kind of also changes through the days with the light and the shade accelerating around the curved walls. It's kind of quite astonishing that it's never twice the same. I mean, even now during the talk, we can experience how much it changes. And you said that it's about waves. You say waves run our world. It made me think something Alighiero Boetti, the late Alighiero Boetti once told me when he said, it all moves across waves with highs and walls and intervals and pauses and silences. So let's talk about waves and how waves run our or your world.
Well, I think in this pavilion in particular, you can, it happens 5 times already. Also with this weather is kind of amazing to have because time, I think the minutes go faster with this. We have the sun goes away, it starts the shades. So I think this pavilion was also made to be discovered in different moments of these 4 months it's going to be here. But it's interesting when it's cloudy, you can almost lose the sight of the columns, but the ceiling is pretty bright and you have a nice light for do the activities for the program and for the people. And when you have a very strong sun, all the shades project in the walls, they start to kind of move and they're all curvy, so it gets really funky environment. So I think that's all about architecture to explore and to welcome inside spaces. No, the other day was interesting that it was pretty hot and you can feel the breeze, but when it's really windy, it helps you not to have it inside the pavilion. Talking about the gaps between the columns in the wall, and all those things were thought in the conversations when we had the drawings in front.
Yeah, I think people are more used dwelling in cities of orthogonal geometries, but actually, like waves are all around, like just the cycle of the day and night. I don't know, the movement of the planets. And in the case of the Serpentine wall, it's like it describes that so literally and physically. So we believe it's somehow transferring some momentum, transferring some energy by vibrating. Also, you know, the sound waves when we speak, it's waves too, right? It's movement. So even if it's more subtle or not literally visible, we think they're very present.
Also, one thing which I actually forgot to ask earlier, which I think is really super fascinating, is getting to know you. You know, we really, all of us here at Serpentine realized that you have, of course, very complementary practices, because you, Isabel, have this long-standing writing practice. As of last night, you know, the day before yesterday, actually, at the press conference, you spoke. We all actually think you're not only a scholar but also a poet, because you wrote an amazing poem, you know, for the catalog. And of course, Alessandro, you think through amazing drawings. You've also both done wonderful books lately. Alessandro, you did a drawing book, and Isabel, you did a writing book. So I wanted to ask you both to tell us about that. Isabel, about your practice as a writer, because you're working also on longer texts, and Alessandro, about your drawing practice. And then maybe also hear a bit more how these two skills come together in the pavilion. And I was like super curious to understand more how your shared design process looks like.
Well, my drawing practice is my architecture practice. So I think I engaged with drawing since I was a 5-year-old. I can find my drawings looking at trying to archive shelf and drawers, and it was all about trying to come and recognize the world you live in. And now as an architect, I think it's our turn to propose and to change, or to think twice again, to, you know, come on, to have to establish maybe new ideas by drawing, or to understand what are we actually trying to propose to build, no? And for a better world.
And of course, for example, in the pavilion, it's very obvious that the language was a very important guiding thread, because it's called a Serpentine and it's at the Serpentine. So the fact that we were talking about the Serpentine wall led us to research a bit deeper into why are the Serpentine galleries called like this, and then why is the Serpentine lake called like this if it only has one bend. So I think within the realm of architecture, language can be a great guide. And maybe my writing practice has to do with the fact that I believe architectural criticism is usually very objective, very academic, very neutral. But architecture is so experiential. We all inhabit spaces since the moment we're born. So I long for architectural criticism that it's more subjective, more autobiographical. So because not many people are doing that, I'm trying to do it.
And you're writing a book. Can you tell us about that?
This is an ongoing collection of essays on relationships between motherhood and architecture. Again, because both are such creative processes. So I'm specifically interested in the spaces for birth, because my own birthing experiences were very important, and during them, gravity revealed itself as the main force guiding labor. And interestingly, gravity also rules architecture. So I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I spent so many years at school and I literally had, no information on vertical birth, for example. Like after studying the Neufert, like all these, like ergonomy treatises for so long, I literally had no notion about one of the most important events in life, which is being born. So yeah, I'm just trying to go deeper into the theme.
And for the catalog, you wrote this very poetic text, really about the serpent and the way how there are different perspectives, on this idea of a serpent. Maybe that would actually also be interesting to hear about that, because we haven't talked about that yet.
It's a short essay that is called A Serpent's Tale. And again, it's like this word game, right? We were joking that British love a good game, a word with games like crinkle crankle. It's called a tale, but it's also the tale of the serpent. And it just has to do with how dimensions that seem to be very far from one another, like mythology and the notion of the serpent in Europe, the notion of the serpent in Mesoamerica, were part of architectural design in a very active way.
Wonderful. 2 or 3 last questions. I think it would be maybe also the moment to talk a little bit about what else is happening in your practice right now. We've just opened the pavilion here, and this is the first public event, and you're, of course, in a couple of days going back to Mexico City. And we were there a few months ago and saw many of your parallel realities which are about to happen. So I think it's interesting for everyone to hear more about that. What's happening in your studio in June 2026? And what are you going to work on when you're coming back?
Well, now all the projects are in standby, so kind of forget about them. Let's see in June how things are working. I'm pretty much confident about everything's waiting for us to arrive. But we are about to build 2 houses in Mexico City. Architecture is sometimes not a business. Like, you need to come to work. Like, what I'm trying to say is, now I'm going to build all these projects ourselves. That is also like a new thing for us, and I think that's a way of really engaging for the architecture and like for the details, and like it's really nice to build all those teams and be part of these amazing workers we have been working with for 10 years now. We still have a show in Ago Projects. It's a full show of furniture. That's
the show we saw.
That's the show, yeah. The show pretty much plays with the notion of, you talk about the conceptual part about the green and blue, but it's a bunch of furniture that allows people to be splitting them, thinking them in different ways. Sometimes you don't understand the purpose of certain details. And what else we're doing?
We're working on a couple of exhibition designs, and some more and more we get NDA projects. So if we wouldn't have been filmed, I would have told you more about them. But yeah, I think mainly we work on projects of very different scales. So there are big things and small things, and surprisingly, we devote the same amount of time to all of them.
And there is a big public building, which I think is now finished in Mexico City, which is, you were part of this kind of master plan. It's a very unusual situation where actually an artist, Gabriel Orozco, was basically designing the master plan for a park which is bigger than Central Park and Kensington Garden together. It's really a gigantic project. And within that Gabriel Orozco master plan, there is an important big public building. So as you spoke about all different scales of your work, the smaller scale, now we're in a pavilion. Maybe it's nice for everyone here to hear about one of your big buildings. Can you tell us about this building?
Yes, it's very beautiful because we were asked to transform 13 former military buildings that were where the presidential guards dwell, and they had their dogs, and they had their trucks, into a cultural center for children and teenagers. So it's, of course, a dream project in terms of program, but at the same time, those buildings were built by the military, so they were not all in great shape. We wanted to preserve as much as possible because there was a meager budget and no time. But we ended up demolishing some of them, and we built 3 new structures, so 3 new buildings, and renovated 10 existing buildings. But we have a new building for School of Music. We have a School of Circus and Aerial Dance. We have the School of Arts. We have workshops for graphics, for photography, and we have a big garden or green space in the middle, for which we also designed the urban furniture. So it's the heart of the city. Truly, we even call it forest instead of park, El Bosque de Chapultepec, which is very special, right? And I think it's very special to be within the heart of Mexico City.
Yeah, I think that project taught us to look at the pre-existing without any judgment. We just took out really the structures that were como blocking certain dynamics or fluxus. And I think it's like a full new way of understanding how to build in the world. I think we need to como reuse more, demolish more, and to really understand which certain elements the project needs and to stick with that. So that can be very cohesive and in a nice relationship what it's already been made. You know?
This idea of a kind of a garden in the middle and nature is of course also something which on a smaller scale happens in your house. And there's been quite a lot of discussion and it's been published about your own house. And I always think it's so fascinating what architects design for themselves. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. We live in a house that for a certain amount of time we call the ruin. We have started to call it house lately. But we found this old adobe ruin, which was a set of very thick adobe walls, like 60 centimeters wide. A part was roof, but it mostly had no roof. So we were presented to it by the people that wanted to sell it for someone to demolish everything and build 5 stories. And while we toured the structure, because it was like offered to us like for very little money, because it was just like a site, we were looking at each other like, trying not like to keep a poker face, because we saw the potential of it, and we were just fascinated by the sequence of spaces, because there are no corridors. It's like open space and then cover space and then open space again. Yes, when we started working on it, we just planted 2 very big trees. So a ceiba, which is the Mayan sacred tree, and the colorín, which is the Aztec sacred tree. So mostly it's a house in which half of it is open spaces, garden-like, and the other half is covered.
Yeah, I think that's the first project we've been building without any drawings at all. So now you just point out like those walls need to go. Can we do this? Like do the over here we need a roof. No, like it's been so day to day, and it's been also very to understand how like clients how also suffer with their budgets and like their processes and decision making, and like for us that project will go forever, I think, and it has taught us to be very clever and be very to never stop observing what activities are happening in their house. For example, right now the kids are having so much fun in the last roof we covered with glass. It's like really bright as this one. And we stopped the construction not to paint the walls, and we didn't even put like a proper floor, because the kids get so expressive while using the paint, like whether painting or like you playing basketball inside. So it's like, okay, this room is perfect now. No, come on. We'll think about it in 5 years where we are, and like maybe we'll become a living space, but now it's a playground. And that would happen with a full house, no?
Now, everything we've discussed so far kind of has been realized. So I think the time has now come to maybe talk about some of your unrealized projects. And of course, the reason why projects are unrealized can be very, wide. There's a reason sometimes which is budgetary, projects which are too expensive to be realized. Some projects are too big to be realized. Sometimes they're also too small to be realized. Ciro Meirelles always wanted to do an exhibition in a museum. The museum would have to be completely empty with the exception of a tiny little cube. And so it took him decades to convince the museum to do that. So that project was too small to be realized. Some projects are unrealizable or utopic or partially unrealizable. Another reason can be that they are kind of forgotten. I mean, in the analog way, maybe somewhere in a locker or in a file, or in the digital way, maybe somewhere in the phone or in the computer, maybe a file, no? Forgotten projects, which we just don't remember. Then, of course, it can be also, another reason can be, and that's actually here at Serpentine in our marathon, I think in 2006, Doris Lessing, the late Doris Lessing, told me that. She said, the most important projects are often also the projects we want to do, but we don't dare to do. I mean, I always wanted to write a novel, and I think it would be really embarrassing, so I've never done it. So that is a kind of an example for that. So within this whole range, this broad range of the unrealized, I thought it would be exciting for everyone here to hear from you about 2 or 3 of your favorite unrealized projects. And of course, with architects, there is then also a very important part of that are also the more than in art, right? Because in art that's rarer, sometimes with public art. But in architecture, the competitions which an architect doesn't win are usually a big percentage of the unrealized projects. And then, as an annex question to that, I was curious also to know the percentage in your practice of what is built and what is unbuilt. I always think that that's a very interesting statistic.
On build, 85, 90%. Build, 10%. But it's funny because they are realized. Like, they are built in models and they are in the office, they're present. And sometimes when we have a new commission, there always happens that there are certain similarities for those forgotten projects. So we always bring them to the table and we remember them and we actually come understand them, and they're pretty lively and they connect and help. And that has been a tool for the office to be constant and to be consistent and to actually learn where we're thinking about the project now, because sometimes you see this come on, oh my God, we shouldn't do that. I'm so glad we didn't build it. No, come on. Because sometimes, I don't know, it's terrible to make mistakes if you want to understand it that way in a built environment. Yeah, what's coming or what project we would like to build, I think we're getting used to public projects. I think that's very gratifying to do. I think private projects should be only for us, for furniture, our own house. I think that's pretty much enough. But of course, we've been working in museums for a long time because of the exhibition design, and I think that will be a nice project to do.
I always think as the Unrealized project as this ongoing research on architecture and motherhood, of course, because it's endless. I want to research so many case studies in so many different places and bring all the conclusions together. But at the same time, starting today, third, fourth day inside the pavilion, and everything feels so great. We're so happy with the result that I think somehow we got a bit too used to build in Mexico and around Mexico, and right now I'm like, oh, it has been so amazing to build in the UK. Maybe we should try to do things outside more, because it taught us so much. It was a huge learning process, and I believe there are maybe more context awaiting for us, in which we will keep learning and stop being in the in the comfort zone of somehow working in the same context.
One more question I forgot earlier, which is kind of urgent, is the question about beauty, because in the long conversation we did for the catalog, you talked about beauty, and I think it's kind of interesting to hear you speak about that, because I always remember in the 90s, the late Dave Hickey, he was an incredible critic. He remembers that he gave a talk, and I was done at the end, somebody stood up and said, could you talk about beauty? And he prompted him to kind of redefine beauty as, in his own words, an invisible dragon that causes visual pleasure in the viewer. So I was kind of curious, in terms of architecture, what is beauty for you?
I don't think it has to do anything with the visual thing. I think it has to do with the experience. It has to do with the engaging, with the balance, with the equity or justice, if you want to call it that way. I think we always say that beauty is not pretty. So I don't know if it's the same things we were saying, that we prefer people engaging or communicating with the building itself than talking about beauty, about the structure itself.
In a polarized world, it's standing for beauty. To me, it's very important, because you're standing for great values, like you're standing for collectiveness, for love. And it's like beauty does have this visual and experiential dimension, but it also have an intellectual dimension to it. So, for example, in this case, to me, as we were saying, the naiveness with which someone can discover that the Serpentine wall, it's using less bricks than a straight wall. To me, there's beauty in it, like in this moment of discoverment, in which you slightly smile, because it's just like a beautiful thing.
That's a great conclusion. I do have one very last question because I see that some architecture students are here with us today, as often with the talks. And I also want to announce that we're actually going to do a whole series of talks in your pavilion in collaboration with the Zaha Hadid Foundation. It's a collaboration with Arik Cheng, the Zaha Hadid Foundation, but also with the AA, connecting to architecture students. There's going to be the Park Nights, the Serpentine Family Days. So the Serpentine is the pavilion is a content machine, because as Rem Koolhaas once said, a pavilion without content would be meaningless shape. And as there are going to be all these events, also with students, I think it's interesting maybe to hear from you an answer to the Rainer Maria Rilke question, because Rainer Maria Rilke wrote this wonderful little book, which is an advice to a young poet. I wanted to ask you what in June 2026 would be your advice to a young architect?
To me, the advice is be as smart as the crinkle wall and use less while providing more.
Yeah, I think the first thing is learn to observe, don't rush. I think you have to draw every day, and architecture is not easy. I think good architecture is just, I think we're here because we've been doing engaging, or we have a commitment with the profession. As I said before, like maybe it's not a business, it's just like something, it has to get done, like it exists since forever and will be existing forever. And being an architect, it's a very important profession, and I think you cannot do it without being very concentrated and committed to it.
It's an amazing conclusion. I hope you're going to all find time to visit our exhibitions of Cecily Brown and then across the bridge of David Hockney, and that you're going to come back many, many times this summer to the pavilion. Isabel and Alessandro, thank you so much.
Thank you.